Hey, this is Nikki G and welcome to Better Commander. Today we're breaking the bank with a little combo deck, Queza, Augur of Agonies. Hey, before we get too deep into this, if you like breaking commanders, doing lots of nasty stuff, and becoming the arch enemy for all future games, consider subscribing to my channel. Makes me happy to have your playgroup scoop it up. You may see some cards you've never seen before and we'll break them together. Queza, Augur of Agonies is 1 white, blue, and a black for a legendary creature, a cephalid advisor. She's a 3/4. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This card's simple. It's 1 line of text and it's a triggered ability. This little cephalid is doing the dance of death. She's got balls of light in hand and is ready to draw some cards. I have to admit, I'm not really sure what's going on in the art. I'm confused by it. I really just have no idea what's happening. People are saying this is a bad card, and I kind of agree. It would be way better if it said all opponents. However, this is still a very powerful effect. We want to be drawing massive amounts of cards, and I don't think I've ever seen this effect on an Esper commander. But you only have 90 or so cards you can draw, right? And life totals in a 4-player pod are going to be more in the 100 range, so we'll have to get a little creative. I have 2 wheel decks in paper, both partner decks, Bralin and Shabraz and Kaidel and Vile Smasher. Love wheel decks, but I'm not a degenerate madman who runs that one Narset Notion Thief. And Queza is winning in a non-infinite way through life loss and draw. This is a really cool concept to me, and no red color identity makes this an interesting deck building challenge. There are a lot of things we can do to spice up this little lady and go ham, drawing tons of cards at once or through the various time twister type effects. And there's one key card that makes a time twister effect really devastating, and that's Smothering Tide. So we want to be able to consistently get that out with tutors, and we're in just the colors to do that. Also, there are various drain effects that can turn our life gain into life drain and provide a redundant, augmentive, I don't know if that's a word or not, effect for our commander. Don't be afraid to use combo to win. Exquisite Blood can serve as a win condition if Smothering Tide gets blasted into the graveyard or exiled. Let's take a look at our draw options in these colors. We want effects that draw for the whole table if Smothering Tide is out. Mind's Aglow is 1 blue for a sorcery. It has joint forces. Starting with you, each player may pay an amount of mana. Each player draws X cards, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. I would not rely on other players to contribute to this, but this can reliably draw cards, and that's what we want to do. Prosperity is a very similar effect. I had a recent game where I made a deal with another player. So I said, hey, if you don't attack me, I'll draw you 3 cards next turn. So he thought I was going to cast Secret Rendezvous, but it was a prosperity where X was 3, everybody drew 3 cards. Technically, I didn't lie, but I don't think he felt as good as he did about that deal. Sorry, Kevin. Sky Scribing is a similar effect as well, but has that forecast effect for 2 and a blue. We have Flux. Flux is more for us, but can benefit our opponents as well. I hate giving them free looting, they kind of get to make that choice, but also maybe it'll buy us some goodwill before we can combo off. So Flux is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player discards any number of cards, then draws that many cards, and then you draw an extra card. Old school Magic art was wild, man. Hey, let me know if you guys know what's going on in this art. I can kind of make out a little guy in the middle, but I have no idea what he's doing. Alright, now we can get into our Time Twister effects. I'm not using Time Twister because it might as well not even exist, as it's $6,000. But we have Days Undoing, which unfortunately ends the turn. I would sandbag this until I'm on my last 3 mana for the turn and get a fresh grip for next turn. This is the cheapest of these effects. Money-wise, it's about $20. Time Reversal is $5,997 less than Time Twister at only $3. So Time Reversal is 3 blue for a sorcery. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards, exile Time Reversal. So this shuffling hand and graveyard into the library is kind of pivotal in a deck where we only have about 90 cards to draw, but we have 120 damage we need to do. Echo of Eons at the time of this recording is about $10 to $15, but this can be cast from the graveyard before it exiles itself for its flashback cost of 2 and a blue. I love this card, and I wish I had more copies. When it was spoiled, I knew I'd find a spot for it in my commander decks, and I happen to have at least 3. Game Plan is essentially Time Reversal for a mana value of 6 with 1 less blue pip required. It's a little easier to cast. We also have emergency powers. I mean, listen, George W. Bush signed the Patriot Act. Now the Azorius can look through your library anytime. It's just time to accept it, all right? Emergency powers is 5, a white and a blue for an instant. Instant is pretty pivotal here as well. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards, exile emergency powers. Addendum: if you cast this spell during your main phase, you may put a permanent card with mana value 7 or less from your hand onto the battlefield, and we have quite a few of those in this deck. Then we have Windfall and Whispering Madness, which kind of do the same thing. Windfall is 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Each player discards their hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. Whispering Madness also has the cipher text, cipher, so you can exile the spell after you cast it and code it onto a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. We can put this on one of our flyers and swing in to get an extra copy, but we won't be doing too much attacking in this deck, so I wouldn't rely on it. So if Smothering Tithe is out when you cast any of the cards I just mentioned, then you're making a ton of treasure tokens. This is a good thing because you just drew a bunch of cards and can wheel again, or you can use any of the next few cards I'll mention to finish off your opponents. Time for the super secret tech here, boys. Necrologia is 3 black for an instant. Cast the spell only during your end step. As an additional cost to cast the spell, pay X life, draw X cards. So hopefully your opponents will be tapped out, you have Queza out on the battlefield. You pay all but your final life into this, because you'll regain all the life you just paid into it with Queza's ability. If your opponent counters it, well, you're dead. But you cast an old card from Exodus illustrated by Brahm, so at least you win that way. But you can just dish out 39 damage to somebody, and after that you'll have to discard all the cards, but you can sculpt your hand to win the next turn. And buddy, look at this art. If this doesn't scream old school fantasy, I don't know what does. I mean, you basically have a Volrath just, I don't know, high-fiving somebody's head here for some reason. I just think it's awesome looking. This guy's an incredible artist. This is Brahm. Speaking of creepy art, the teeth kind of do it for me in this one. Peer into the Abyss is 4 black for a sorcery. Target player draws cards equal to half the number of cards in their library and loses half their life. Round up each time. So you'll gain the life back from Queza and then some. You'll draw 41 cards or so, dealing 41 damage to some unlucky soul. Alright, so blue also has a bunch of mass draw effects that kind of all do the same thing. You can draw a bunch of cards, deal a bunch of damage, have gas for the next turn. Pull from Tomorrow, Mind Spring, Blue Sun Zenith can draw you into your win conditions. Pay attention to which of these cards are instant, so you can just save up mana for interaction and then draw cards on your last opponent's end step. The drain effect from Queza can be doubled using a subset of vampires and enchantments. You want to include like at least 4 or 5 of these effects so that you can double up the life loss for your opponents. Marauding Blight Priest and Cliffhaven Vampire make each instance of life gain into an additional point of life loss for your opponent. So it says each time you're gaining life, so each card you're drawing is a separate instance of life gain, so you're essentially doubling Queza's ability. Epicure of Blood is another slightly less efficient vampire drain effect. Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose works similarly, but for only one opponent. So Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose is 2 and a black for a legendary creature, Vampire Cleric. He's a 1/3. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. And then he has 3 black. Creatures you control gain lifelink until the end of turn. We do have some flyers and some beefy creatures in here, so that could come in handy to finish off an opponent. Sanguine Blonde, Exquisite Blood. Sanguine Blood Blondes combo. Sure, we're using Tutors so we can get the Exquisite Blood to combo out with any of the above vampires, and with Queza out, all we need to do is draw 1 card. I didn't mean to say Sanguine Blonde. I meant to say Sanguine Bond, of course. So Tutors are going to be a key part of this deck. Otherwise, Queza's just a little bit weak. So speaking of Tutors, we need Vampiric, Demonic, and in addition to those 2, we can run Enlightened and Idyllic. These can get us key combo pieces to combo out and win, while our opponents lament their decision to play with us in the first place. So we're not running a ton of creatures, and we are in white, so we want to run some really good board wipes and removal. Fumigate's a standout as it provides life gain to synergize with our enchantments. And speaking of enchantments, Teferi's Ageless Insight seems pretty good in this deck. Teferi's Ageless Insight is 2 blue for a legendary enchantment. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. This is going to go ham with all of our draw effects. Consecrated Sphinx and Sire of Stagnation round out our creature suite. These are both 6 drops and will draw either a ton of cards or they'll draw all of our opponent's removal. wanted to highlight a couple artifacts that make this deck really hum. Psychosis Crawler is awesome in this deck. It's 5 generic mana for an artifact creature, Phyrexian Horror. It's a star. Whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. This is going to stack up damage on all those wheels, and Psychosis Crawler's power and toughness are each equal to the number of cards in your hand. Alhamaret's Archive is also 5 generic mana for a legendary artifact. If you would gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. Synergizes great with our commander. If you would draw a card, except the first one you draw on each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. This is going to keep us alive, and it's a redundant Teferi's Ageless Insight. This card's awesome. Well of Lost Streams is 4 generic mana for an artifact. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained. If you do, you draw X cards. So this can just draw us a ton of cards, keep our hand full, and use up all the spare mana that we have. The confusing, annoying Hand Disruptor. Teferi's Puzzle Box is 4 generic mana for an artifact. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in their hand on the bottom of their library in any order, then draws that many cards. So this is going to draw us into garbage all the time and draw our opponents into their awesome removal. Just kidding. This thing synergizes great with Smothering Tithe and our commander. And last but certainly not least, the ever-broken Memory Jar. 5 generic mana for an artifact. So this has the ability tap, sacrifice it. Each player exiles all cards from their hand face down and then draws 7 cards. At the beginning of the next end step, each player discards their hand and returns to their hand each card they exiled this way. Note that this card says draw 7 cards. This synergizes with our commander fantastically. Activate this at instant speed if threatened with removal or during your main phase so you can take advantage of that full fresh grip. In addition to all this fun stuff, you may want to include some control elements. Because you'll only have 1 or 2 creatures, they'll be high priority targets once the damage starts getting thrown around and your opponents figure out what's going on with Smothering Tithe. You're going to need to protect it. You also need a fairly optimized mana base with so many colored pips. This won't be a cheap deck to build, so tighten the old belt. We're going to skip dinner and we're going to buy fetch lands. You're also going to want lots of cheap ramp. 2 or 1 mana color fixing if possible, all the signets and talismans. Talismans and signets are great because you can get your commander out a turn early. I'm going to post the deck list on Moxfield, so go to Moxfield, hit the link, playtest the deck. It's a blast. It'll usually combo out on turn 6 or so if uninterrupted. Of course, your opponents are going to run some interruptions, so you might want to even up the interaction in this deck. It's a fun deck to play. Sequencing is important. You have to pay attention. So I want you guys in the comments to tell me what I missed. You guys are all probably better Magic players than I am. I'm basically just an idiot here in my basement. So don't be a wallflower. Join the Life Lost party with Queza, the Doomfish. This is going to be Nikki G from Better Commander signing off.